The cell was a wedge of stone and iron, damp as a forgotten well, its single slit given to a slice of sky. Eddard Stark spent the morning measuring light along the mortar with his thumb and found the same answer he had every day since being thrown there. The city above him turned its wheels without him, and his notion of time was now the slow drip of water and the taste of metal in the air. He did not speak to the rat that visited, though once he broke a crumb of bread and set it gently on the floor as an offering of truce. He had spoken enough in this city. He had told truths as if the truth could be set like a banner and men would line up under it. He had learned. In the hours when the light was not a blade but a bruise, he pressed his knuckles to his mouth and thought of the words he had left unspoken, to Robert, to his children, to the ghost in the blue winter roses. At the softest hour of the evening, he heard the latch draw like a knife from leather. The jailer folded himself in, smelling of wine and old onions, a lantern tucked in the crook of his arm. Behind him materialized a man so quiet and soft-footed, he might have been woven from shadow. He wore the clothing of a lesser servant, the kind one forgets even while looking at him. His hands were smooth and ringless. His eyelids did not seem to blink. "My lord," the second man said, and in that tone, in the precise placing of respect just shy of servility, Ned knew him. It would be like the spider to come in a skin that did not belong to him. "Have you brought me my head?" Ned said dryly, because a dry sentence was easier to say than the things he feared. "Your levity is noted," murmured Varys. He set the lantern on the floor and watched the flame settle. "I bring you an argument and away. What argument can change my bars? The one that belongs to your daughters." He waited until Ned's eyes came up. "The Boy King asks for a confession. It is a cruel request, and I would spare you if I could. The city wishes to see you admit treason. Should you do so, there would be talk of the wall. There would be breathing room. Should you refuse, there is a sword and it longs to be theatrical." Ned closed his eyes long enough for the lantern's glow to paint the backside of his lids in fire. "And you counsel me to lie. I counsel you to live in such a way that your daughters are not displayed as the price of your honor," Varys said, distant and terribly reasonable. "My lord, the truth serves you in Winterfell. In King's Landing it is a dish poured out for dogs." Ned's jaw tightened until he felt the old ache that camped under his ear when a storm pressed in. "You speak of my daughters. Where are they? One is held, one runs. If the city does not take them, the city will break them. You could make a sound that turns faces and slows hands." Varys lifted a finger, tasting the room like a man who tasted soup. "There is also this, the promise of sending you north. Many promises are made at court. Some are kept. Not by children," Ned said, and he thought of the boy's clenched jaw, his bright, eager cruelty. "Not this boy." Varys's eyes flicked to the door and back. "No, not by him, but there are other hands that can act while his is still learning to sign his name." "Whose?" "The kind that never show themselves," Varys said. "For now, we must be merciful to chance. If you will utter the words for the crowd, I can contrive the rest." "How?" Ned asked, weary of riddles. The lantern's flame leaned when Varys exhaled. "The Red Keep sits on a hill full of older bones. Behind the words and ceremonies, there are drains and runnels that know how to carry filth away. There is a gate no man uses because there is no reason to use it. I have found one, and you would have me crawl like filth through the city's veins. I would have you breathe." Ned's hands went to the cold iron. The metal's chill climbed into him as if it could soften his marrow. He looked at Varys and saw a man who served the city as a gardener serves a prickly hedge, with thick gloves, pruning when he must, fertilizing what he needed to live. He tried to think of honor as a river. Sometimes it went underground. Sometimes it was a slow welling rather than a flash of silver. "If I do this," he said, "if I subject my name to this, if I buy time with falsehood, will there be an end where true things can be spoken again?" Varys tipped his head. "If you find your way north, my lord, you may build a place where true sentences can stand upright. If you stay, this city will eat your words and wear your bones like jewelry." It was a vile bargain. It was a father's bargain. Ned did not have to like it to take it. He rubbed his jaw where the white of an old scar hid in his beard and said, "What must be done?" "Speak in the square tomorrow," Varys said. "Bow to the boy and the mother. Weep if you can do so without breaking yourself. After, you will be taken to a secure room while the crowd disperses." He glanced down at the lantern, and his mouth made a shape that might have been sorrow. "I will come for you. The rest you must learn quickly and perform perfectly. There will be no second attempt." He went, and the lantern's flame dwindled and flared. Ned stood in the cold and measured the space where a choice had been. In the square, the next day, the sun was too bright. The crowd had the smell of tallow and wine, of breath trapped under cloth and the tang of iron. He saw Sansa's face, an oval of hope rising through fear, and later he would remember only the distance between her and him. A little space as vast as a field of ice. He said what was required. His voice was a thing pulled out of him like a rope from a well, hand over hand. He bent. He tasted ash. He was taken aside. The room was a gray box with a table and a pitcher of water and a platter of sugared almonds. He did not eat. The water tasted of the tin cup. He waited until the latch scraped and Varys walked in with a small, thin man whose left ear was a ragged edge, the flesh puckered like a dried apple. This second man kept his eyes down and his hands tucked into his sleeves like a penitent. "We have a moment," Varys said. "No more." The thin man slid to the door and listened, and his ear never moved. They bound Ned's wrists with cord so loose it would not have held an obedient child. They set a hood on his head. He was led through spaces that smelled of coin and dust, down corridors that breathed out the breath of old stone. The hood made him clumsy. Twice he stumbled and the thin man's hand was at his elbow, efficient and steadying, as if he were carrying a sack that had to be worth something at the market. They reached a place where the air was cold and wet and the iron under his fingers was slick with a slime he chose not to identify. When they lifted the hood, he saw the underworld of the Red Keep. A conduit of brick and old lime, a rush of dark water, the long whisper of it hurrying away. The thin man knelt without comment and levered up a grating that felt older than language. Varys's soft leather shoes made no sound as he stepped back. This way, Ned dropped. For a heartbeat, he was 12 again, scrambling across a stream with Brandon laughing somewhere ahead of him. Then the water took him to the shins and leaf cold seeped along his bones. The thin man replaced the grate above with patient fingers. Varys did not say goodbye. Ned did not look back. They went on. A man with a torn ear, a lord soaked to the thigh, a smell of rot and seawater, a faint current that knew where it wanted to go. It was black but not absolute. There were places where the brickmakers had mislaid a stone and a blade of light made a star on the opposite wall. There were rats and once the skeleton of a cat curled on a ledge like a comma. They moved in silence broken only by the thin man's low instructions. "Here, keep left, mind your head." They came to a place where the tunnel widened and the water deepened and the thin man tested each step with a rod he had carried tucked in his sleeve. "Now," he whispered, and bent to a thick iron stop. The plug moved as if it had not moved in a century. Water thundered forward, and Ned was blinded by it, stung. He thought for one bright, ridiculous moment that he had been lured to this drowning, and then the dark opened and there was a rush of air that smelled of salt and kelp. On the other side they were in a cavern, low-roofed, open to an inlet where the skin of the bay lapped. A small boat nudged the stones. It was not much of a craft, a poor fisherman's child, narrow and plain, its side tarred, its oars wrapped with rag where hands would blister. A woman sat in it, a scarf masking her hair, her shoulders like a gull's, lean and used to wind. She did not look at them. When the thin man helped Ned in, she whispered, almost to herself, "Late, early enough," said the thin man. He put the grating back with an effort that made his breath hiss, then dropped down and took an oar. The woman did not acknowledge him. She had the other oar and this was a world that obeyed her. The boat slid along the underbelly of the city. Above them, faint as moth wings, came the noise of men making news. They did not cut for the open mouth of the Blackwater. The woman brought them along a channel that ran under timbers where ships moored, the heavy creak of rope and the swing of lanterns above them. Twice they stilled utterly as larger things moved. Once a guard called to another about dice and debts and never glanced down. The woman never wasted the oar. She moved as if the water had known her since she could walk. By the time they came clear of the piers, it was full night, and the stars were fewer here in the south. But they were still there, pricked into the black as if someone had been impatient with the darkness. A larger boat waited for them, a sloop with one patched sail furled tight. Its paint was dull as dead scale. A man leaned over and said, "Couldn't fetch the old man." And the woman gave him a look that could have stripped bark. "This is the old man we fetch," she said. "Take him and take the tide, and do not let him be seen." The sloop smelled of pitch, onions, and an old stew that had been boiled until it forgot its ingredients. Ned stumbled aboard, and it took on a motion of its own under his feet. His wet trousers chafed his knees. The woman reached up once, touched the torn-eared man's arm, and vanished back into the city's throat. "Where?" Ned asked before he remembered he had given the choosing to others. The torn-eared man answered anyway. "North along the coast. We'll not be welcome inside Duskendale, and we won't put in at Maidenpool if we can help it. There's a cove near Saltpans where my cousin tilts his nets. We'll take the waters outside the shoals and make for the Bight. The mast'll stay quiet and the oars will do the labor." "Do you have a name?" Ned asked him. "Not for you, my lord," the man said without malice. He pointed Ned at a space under the combing with a rolled blanket and a barrel that would be his chair, his table, and his pillow by turns. "Eat when you can. Sleep when the sea gives leave. Speak to no one on the water." They moved then, the deck rising and falling like a patient animal's breathing. The city made a smear of gold behind them, and then the curve of the land took that away too. The wind came around meanly. Ned's damp clothes began to freeze a little where the air touched them. The crew was small. The torn-eared man, a child with a rope-burned hand and eyes that weighed everything, and an old fellow with a twisted foot who kept them all alive by naming every cloud and tasting the wind with his mouth open as if it were wine. No one asked where Ned had bled. No one called him Lord. If they guessed, they did not speak it. The first night he did not sleep. He sat on the barrel and listened to the hull talk to the water. He put his hands in his sleeves and warmed them on his own body like a miser hoarding coins. He thought he would think of honor until dawn, but it was not honor that came to him. It was a memory of Arya daring the boys at Winterfell to jump the stream when the mud was cold. It was Sansa singing to herself as she stitched. It was Robb standing in the yard with a wooden sword, stubborn in his repetitions. It was Bran looking up at the sky as if the sky were a riddle he could solve if only he were allowed to climb high enough. It was Rickon holding the hem of his mother's skirt and scowling at the dogs. Later, when the sea had taught him that it did not care about his breathing or his sorrow, he slept in snatches. He dreamed of snow that fell in a spiral and did not melt when it touched the ground. He woke sweating and stiff. The days broke into tasks. He learned to coil rope and to throw it, and once nettled the back of his knuckles with line burn and received no sympathy for it. He learned to pull when the torn-eared man said pull and to get his weight low and let his thighs do what his shoulders could not. He learned to piss over the side without earning laughter. At night, the twisted-foot old man taught him the names of the lights and then told him to forget them because tomorrow they would be different. "The sea teaches humility," the old man said without looking over, "and then it teaches indifference." Their first landfall was a cove that had no name, only a notch in a line of black teeth. A man rowed out with barrels and did not ask who took them. The torn-eared man put coin into his hand, and that was the end of the conversation. The second landfall was a sandbar where they gathered shells because the child with the rope-burned hand had a sister who sold them as ornaments in a town none of them would ever name. The third landfall was a threat they recognized and avoided. A long ship with too many eyes. They went out to deeper water and let the old man's advice about wind put them beyond sight. Ned did not try to correct the course of a world that had knocked him down into anonymity. He watched the coasts unfold like a set of shoulders hunched against weather. He watched the gulls ride the seam between two air currents as if they were reading. He learned the sound of fish slapping at the surface and knew when it was false and a crest was about to break into a slap of spray instead. When the old man let him, he took the tiller and felt the boat, not with his hands, but with the taut string of his back. He won no praise for it, and the lack of praise did not anger him. Steadied him. Praise had been a currency in the South. Here, there was only whether one paid attention, whether one learned to live. At night, sometimes, he spoke to the torn-eared man. The conversation was a careful thing, a raft made from whatever wood was at hand. "You served in the city," Ned said once. "It was not a question. I served hunger." "Whose?" "Mine," the man said, and rolled his shoulder as if to dislodge a memory that had nested there and grown too tame. "And now, I serve a passage," the man said. "Men as important as you are often only a cargo. I prefer coal. Coal does not think about whether it deserves its destination." "You know who I am," Ned said. The man looked over the side without looking at the man he ferried, and that was answer enough. "You risk a great deal." "I risk what I have," the man said. "Those who play for kingdoms risk things I do not own. I take a smaller game. I prefer games I can win." "Do you play for yourself alone?" Ned asked. "For those who are mine," the man said gently, and in hearing that Ned heard the whole of it. A cousin with nets. A woman under the city who ran oars like a skeleton runs fingers along a harp. A child with rope-burn hands and a sister on shore with shells that were not for beauty so much as bread. They moved past Duskendale without letting the cliff see them. They gave Maidenpool to the gulls. They found the familiar ruin of salt pans and noted its smoke and did not speak of it. The cove at which they would have bought water was guarded by 3 armed men with the posture of those who have discovered that a spear can turn into law, and the torn-eared man said, without changing his tone at all, "Another place." Sometimes, inland, they saw a dust plume and knew a column of horse was making its way like a worm through fruit. Sometimes, at night, they saw a glow that was not fog, not dawn, and did not know which lord had made which mistake to produce it. The south, under them, rotted in a quiet, patient way. On the 7th day, the weather decided to instruct them. The wind rose like a man correcting a child. The sea, which had learned patience, tried its hand at anger. The sky tore its own hem. The old man's hands on the lines were fast and old both at once. The child was very calm and tied himself with such matter that Ned understood. He had been taught that lesson before and had not learned it from a book. The torn-eared man lifted Ned's hands and put rope into them. "You hold and do not let your mind go after what you cannot control." "What do I control?" "The part of the rope in your hands." The man grinned then, not in humor but in the relief of telling someone the truth. "And perhaps your voice, if you do not waste it." The world became a set of simple orders. The hull asked. They answered. The sail begged. They gave and took. The oars were teeth in a mouth that did not want to be forced to chew and yet must. The boat reared and turned and once tried to come about into a posture that would have frightened them differently. And the old man cursed the boat in a tone that was almost affectionate, and she settled down. Ned's hands blistered under rope. His shoulders shook. He did not ask for the storm to stop. He asked for his palms to hold. In the worst of it, when the sky was a smashed bowl over them, he thought of the young boy he had been, looking into a winter that had gone on longer than anyone thought it should. He thought of the lesson his father had taught him rounding a hill on a day so cold the trees cracked, that a man does not get to choose the storm he receives. He chooses the manner in which he stands. When the storm went, it went like a man who had done what he came for. The sky was suddenly lighter and the lift and fall of the deck was less madness and more the long sigh of an old thing returning to tireless labor. They were all wet to the bone. The child with the rope burns began to laugh a little, quietly, because he still had his skin. The old man sat down and permitted himself to close his eyes in a way that looked like prayer and was not. They turned in toward land because water is a thief that sometimes returns what it has stolen and sometimes does not. They found a strip of gray stones and a line of scrub with leaves that looked chewed by wind, and they made a drift fire that used smoke like a blanket. The torn-eared man produced, from somewhere, a bundle of dried fish and a heel of bread. They warmed their hands and burned their tongues and endured a silence that was not unhappy. After, when the child slept with his mouth open, the old man glanced at Ned and said, "That will do," in a tone that meant a man had not disgraced the sea. "Where are we?" Ned asked, more out of the need to put words in the world than for information he could use. "A stretch of coast that does not care for maps," the old man said. "But soon the shore will begin to show the north in its bones. The stones change, the birds change, the salt changes its mind about what it wants. You'll know. Even the wind speaks a different language." Ned nodded and pulled the blanket around his shoulders and went to sleep with the taste of salt in his teeth. He dreamed of Winterfell's hot springs and woke to a cold that fought in through the blanket as if it had hired a lawyer. They went on. Days were a necklace of small tasks. Nights were a set of worries put aside and then taken back when dawn handed them over. The torn-eared man taught Ned to read a shoreline by its color. The old man taught him to listen to the tone of waves as they broke on different shapes of stone. The child taught him, without intending to, that youth is a way of being close to the ground and all the small things that crawl there. Once Ned saw a sleek black head rise in the water, and its eyes were old and uninterested and full of the humor of those who live in a world not ours. It regarded the boat as one might regard a beetle and slipped under. It felt like a blessing. They reached the stretch of coast where the air turned colder and the birds were fewer and the distances between places where people had tried and failed to make farms were longer. The torn-eared man stood with his feet apart and his hands hooked into his belt and breathed deeply, as if this thin air had more substance than the thick air in the south. "We'll turn toward the bight soon," he said. "White Harbor will be watching the approaches. The Manderleys are not fools. There are teeth there that never show themselves unless you are food." "White Harbor," Ned said, and the words were a light in him. He had been a young lord there once, and Lord Wyman's laughter had been wide and complicated and kind. He had eaten pies and felt his lungs expand with the particular air that ran about the White Knife and down the docks with a busy mind of its own. In his memory, the place had a sound like a net shaking out. "We'll not run into the dock like heroes," the torn-eared man said. "You are cargo, not cargo that wants to be counted. There's a place along the muddy shore where a certain warehouse has a certain back door that sticks and a certain boy with long arms can make it not stick. From there a corridor. From there a gate. There will be a man with a ring of iron on his wrist. You will see it. You will say only that you have a message for the Pie King. That is all." "I am not a message," Ned said, and could not keep the bleak humor out of it. The torn-eared man's mouth bent. "You are all that and more, my lord. But for the sake of not getting any of us killed, be a message until you are not." They cut along the low shore of the bight, and at dusk a fog rolled in with its own ideas and speed. The old man looked content. "Fog is a curtain," he said. "A play can go on behind it." They ghosted toward the river's mouth. The tide pushed and pulled, and the torn-eared man let it argue, allowing the boat to appear incompetent in the way that fools the water into mercy. There were lights on either bank, and between them the breath of the White Knife lifted and fell. Ned felt a pressure at the back of his eyes, and knew it for what it was. Not weakness, not age, not grief alone, but the sensation of a man who had been walking a long time and had finally seen a roof he could trust. He did not have the luxury of standing long at that. The torn-eared man made him duck, and they slipped along the shadow of a barge whose owner shouted something vulgar about thieves and received back a blessing that was a little worse. And then they slid under a pier, and a land smell of fish and old wood and ash and clay came to meet them. The child with the rope-burned hand led him across slick boards and into a gap between two buildings where nettles had made a life for themselves. They went through a door that had been made to refuse but learned to accept, and the child called softly, "Moll," and a woman's voice answered from somewhere below, "You're late," in the kindly way of women who can count tides better than men. They passed into a space where a kiln had been, long ago, and was not now, and a passage that had never seen sun. Ned's eyes told him only lies here. He followed the boy's shoulder. They came out in the back of a room that smelled of flour. A man kneaded dough as if it had insulted his sister. He did not look up at first, and when he did, His glance skipped across Ned like a stone across water. Only one thing lingered, the pattern of iron welded around the man's heavy wrist, a piece of ornament so plain and ugly that it could not be dismissed as vanity. "King of Pies," the boy said, almost a laugh, and the man grunted as if to say that mockery was an acceptable greeting among those who loved each other. "Close the door," said the baker. His eyes went to Ned again and this time stayed. There was calculation there, but not the kind that turned men into columns of numbers. "You've come to me like a sack of grain no one wants the miller to count." "I have a message," Ned said, and the words were both falsity and truth. He carried more than one. "For Lord Wyman." "You and everyone else," the baker said, wiping his hands on a cloth that had borne older bread and older stories. "At least you are not a Lannister. They're easy to spot. They want things given, and when they are not given they turn red." He stepped around the counter and tilted his head. "Your enemies are the kind that erect statues while their workmen pull down the scaffolding." "I could use a smaller kind of enemy," Ned said. "That would make you a smaller kind of man," the baker said. "I do not think you are that." His hand flicked. "You will go out the side door and you will walk, slowly and badly, like a man with a sore knee. You will not look behind you. A boy will trip against you carrying apples he cannot afford to drop. You will steady him. He will steady you. You will not speak. He will lead you into a street where a fishmonger once sold rotten fish. It does not sell anything now. At the end of that street there is a green door that has not been painted in a decade. It will open. Inside there is a chair and a fat man with a mind like a ledger. If you are who you think you are, he will feed you. He feeds men he wants to use and men he loves. If you are not, then he will still feed you. He does not like hunger. Go." "Thank you," Ned said. The words tasted strange. He had been thanked by many. He was not used to saying it this much. "For the sake of our city," the baker said, shrugging off gratitude like flour dust. "And the sake of my grandchild, who needs a world with less murder in it. Out." Ned did as he was told. He went into the street like a patient entering a corridor after the knife. No one watched him. He became a man with a knee who did not like it. The boy with apples made his theater with competence and a real anxiety about the fruit, and Ned steadied him and then was steadied, and they went together into the dead fish street. The green door opened. Ned stepped through a world's thin skin and into a room where it was warm and smelled of spiced wine and meat that had been cooked slowly and gently until it remembered what it wanted to be. Lord Wyman Manderley was seated in a chair that had been made to take his particular weight, not as an insult to him, but as an honor to the Carpenters. He wore a robe that looked comfortable enough to convince a man of any number of treacheries. His face was a tired kindness, and his eyes were sharp the way an accountant's knife is sharp when it peels back the false from the true. "I have a habit," Wyman said without rising, "of eating those who would eat me, at least in metaphor. In practice, I eat stews." "I bring you trouble," Ned said. "I am old friends with it," Wyman said, and his mouth curved into a brief, grave smile. "Please sit. I have been saving some things for a man who would need them. I did not know the man would be you. I am sorry, and I am not." There was a plate, and it was not stacked with pies as rumor would have had it, but with a stew of barley, carrot, and the shy meat that came off bones after long talking with water. Ned ate because he had learned offense is sometimes done to the body by refusing it what it needs. He found the first steady breath he had taken in days. "You were supposed to be a block in the square," Wyman said, not cruelly. "There was a noise this morning and then no noise this afternoon. I took that lack of noise as an omen I could like. You are a man who manufactures quiet." "I did not. Varys did," Ned said, and something in Wyman's eyes noted the name and filed it. "We will not speak of that man when we do not need to," Wyman said. "It brings spiders." "Then we should speak of the North," Ned said, and felt something like a spear being planted in soil he trusted. "Of its people. Of what it can be when the rest of the world forgets itself." "Ah," Wyman said, and his hands folded on his stomach the way hills fold in snow. "Now we come to the stew that must simmer. Speak slowly. This is a long recipe." Ned did. He spoke of winter not as a threat that needed banners and bravado, but as a cycle that required patience and a certain kind of political mind. He spoke of the Mormonts, who were poor in ways the South did not recognize and rich in ways the South could not count. He spoke of the Umbers, who could rally 1,000 throats into one shout and 1,000 fists into one club, and of the Tall Hearts who believed in the quiet miracle of harvest. He spoke of the Glovers, who made things with their hands and thus would know how to make a league. He spoke of the mountain clans, his voice slowing there, remembering the way they had looked at him as at weather, a thing one must live with rather than obey. He spoke, at last, of the Reeds of the Neck, of Howland Reed, who owed him not only friendship but where his life had turned into the life that it was. Wyman listened with the oblique focus of a man hearing a tune and testing it against old songs. He did not say no. He did not say yes. He asked for the size of stores. He asked which rivers had ice on them in what month. He asked about small boats and their capacities. He asked how many shepherds could be turned into light infantry without melting a winter's cheese. He asked what stories should be told to boys of 18 to make them accept this plan, what stories to tell their mothers to make them give it their blessing, what stories to tell their grandfathers so they could sit by the fire and not feel cheated by history. "Begin," he said at last, so softly that the word had to be sifted from his breath. "Begin, my lord. But you must begin as if your enemy were hunger and not merely men with lions on their cloaks." "I have no wish to be a king," Ned said, surprising himself with the need to make that clear. "I have a wish to keep my people alive and themselves." "That is a king's wish, the only one that matters," Wyman said. He sipped his wine. "The South will call it treason if you achieve it. Do not let that change the ingredients." They spoke until the hearth collapsed upon itself in a sigh, and by then the first threads of a net had been cast in the room without leaving it. They had not yet written a name upon what they were making. They did not have to. They would fill it with deeds and it would find its own name. When Ned slept, he slept under a roof that had been built to protect far more than his bones. It had been built by men who had believed the North could be wealth rather than merely a place to be endured. He woke to the noises of a harbor. Call, reply, the slap of rope, the argument of gulls, a song someone sang to trick a cart into pulling without stopping. He felt the city around him like a big animal breathing in its stall. He dressed in clothes that were not his and that fit him well enough to disguise him in a crowd without making him conspicuous for his wealth. His sword, when Wyman returned it to him, was wrapped up like a sad loaf of bread. When he unwrapped it, it shone in the room like an old sentence remembered perfectly. "We will be watched," Wyman said, "by those who would help you and those who would help themselves. We will be listened to by ears that claim no head. The old recipes are good. You must be less than you are in public and more than you believe yourself capable of in private. You must walk in markets and note where the dough is short. You must know where the butchers are poor and where they pretend they are not. You must be the kind of man who knows what wheat costs not only in coin but in a woman's fatigue. Send for the Umbers," Ned said quietly. "They love you not. They respect your honest greed. Send for the Glovers. Send word to Lord Bolton and watch what he does with it. Send a whisper to the mountain clans that there's a man with gray in his beard who would ask them to be stubborn again for their own sake. And send a letter to the Neck that speaks with the words I would use if I were standing on the edge of a green pool. You know the kind I mean." "I do not," Wyman said judiciously, "but I can hire a man who does." He smiled then, and his teeth were very good and very many. "We will send letters that could be recipes for pies. We will send fish wrapped in words. We will teach our children how to read with an ear for lies. And we will keep you breathing." In that keeping was a subtle, continuous labor. Wyman's men moved as if they carried flour sacks, and perhaps they did, but some of the sacks were filled with a different grain. A boy who looked like he would one day be tall carried messages in a fish's belly. A woman whose hands were rough with dough visited the docks at low tide and spoke to a man mending nets. A priest walked by and did not see anything. That was perhaps the best thing a priest could do in those days. Ned made himself small in the city, and men who remembered him as taller did not insist on saying so. A week into this, A letter came wrapped in the skin of a pike and perfumed with mud in a way that no Southron nose would find usual. Wyman pushed it across the table with 2 fingers. Ned slit it, not with a knife but with the nail of his thumb, as he had once slit frogs when he and Howland Reed were boys in their different ways. The letter did not have a name signed to it, but it could not have been written by any other man. Its words stepped lightly as a hunter on peat. It did not waste a syllable. It spoke of the neck tightening, of paths closing to enemies who did not know how to listen to reeds to find the way. It spoke of men who would watch because watching was their work and their pride. It asked nothing directly. It offered a kind of silence in which things could be done. Ned's throat tightened. He nodded to Wyman and sat for a long time with his eyes on the table while other business moved around him like fish through water. Letters for the Umbers took a different tone. Loud, explicit, full of practical mention of ale and the strong arms of their men, and the particular honor of being first to do a thing that would be seen and sung. For the Glovers, there were drawings, precise diagrams of an adapted plow that would serve in hardened ground ahead of season, and promises of iron shipments and men to swing hammers for wages paid on the nail. For the Mormonts, whose ledgers were tied up in fish and timber, there were precise accounting and promises that did not sound like promises. For the Boltons, there was nothing that felt like a direct invitation. There was a set of questions about roads, garrisons, the state of the Dreadfort's walls after the last northern winter, couched in such a way that a refusal to answer would be its own answer. For the mountain clans, Wyman sent no letter at all, but a man with a scar on his cheek and a pack of dried meat and a good cloak with repairs that had been made by a woman who knew needle better than war. The man had an instruction not given to him with words. It was to be tired when he arrived, to ask for hospitality, to listen to the wind in those places until the wind told him what to say. The first to arrive were men of White Harbor itself, which was both easier and harder. They did not have to go far, and so they came with SPE. Addition, they had to discover what kind of town they were, and so they came with argument. But they were the kind of men who set their contentiousness aside when a plan went from talk to work. In the yard behind Wyman's counting house, a dozen men who had once been fishers took up shields that had been stacked for festival days and remembered that their arms knew another kind of movement. A cooper took up a spear and cursed his shoulder and then smiled when it obeyed him still. A woman who had sons in different crews came to watch and to make sure no one did a stupid thing because a lord had praised him. A boy with hands already calloused asked where he should put himself and was told to learn to run quickly from one point to another without losing his breath. He did, and was sick like a little dog behind the stable and still grinned at the end. I would rather have 50 of these than 200 men from the south who have never seen a real winter, Wyman said, satisfied. They do not look like heroes. Heroes make sieges. These make walls. The next to arrive were the Glovers. They came with hands that belonged to tools. They could not help but look at the hinges of the gates and the way the shutters were hung. They were not insulted when Wyman let them do exactly the work they could not keep from doing. They took measurements. They asked for iron and for hinges to be forged with a particular kind of bend. They went away with patterns in their heads and came back with bars that would fit across doors without racking. Their lord, Galbart, was a man who spoke in complete sentences even when the weather did not require it. He embraced Ned as one might embrace a brother one had not seen since both were too young to remember not seeing each other. The Umbers will come when they have finished shouting in their hall, Galbart said. They must shout and then they will come. You need not worry about them except to worry about what they will knock down by accident when they arrive. Ned smiled, careful of his face. I do not worry about them. I worry about how to feed them. Feed them meat and onions, Galbart said. And give them something to argue with that is not each other. In my view, a wall is a better thing to argue with than a man with an axe. A handful of days later, the Umbers did arrive. The yard behind the counting house felt smaller when the Great John stood in it. His laugh bounced off walls and came back as if it recognized an old friend. He carried a barrel like a man carries a child he has been longing to see. You look like a man who has been to market and found what he wanted was not for sale, he told Ned, grinning. I say we go to that market with cudgels and see if we can get a discount. You will not, Ned said, and it pleased the Great John to be so told. Then I will content myself with making such noise at the door that someone else will come to tell us to leave," the great John said. "And then we will deal with him." They spoke not of war, though war was in them. They spoke of how to put men into lines and make them break and come back together like water on stone. They spoke of dogs and whether more should be kept. They spoke of fish and whether more could be caught. They spoke of wood and the manner in which it should be cut so that a fence would not rot from the bottom up faster than a man's patience. Ned slept little, but when he slept with the sound of work under his dreams. A hammer, a rope, the creak of a pulley, the thud of grain shifted, the sigh of a cow. He felt himself becoming something like a carpenter of lives. He had built before, fires in winter, fortifications when it had pleased Robert to go hunt a rebellion like a boar. This was of a different order. It involved the kind of intelligence that counts buttons and measures days and knows what happens when one man's pride meets another's hunger. A fortnight into the enterprise, a quiet man with boots more suited to marsh than city stepped into Wyman's office and put a handful of mud on the wooden floor as if that were a courtesy. He smelled of grass and old water and a patience learned from frogs. He did not announce himself. He watched Ned as one watches a tree one once climbed as a boy and now finds taller. "Howland," Ned said, and the world quelled around the edges of his vision until the room's ceiling was the only horizon he could accept. He stood and then put his hands on the table until his knees forgot to shake. Howland Reed's face had been made by weather and duty. Time had moved across it with respect. He took Ned's forearm in a grip that could drag a boat up a bank. "My friend," he said, and there was nothing in the world then that could make the word smaller or more complicated than it needed to be. "Your letter smelled of mud. I took that as a sign. I could not send you anything else," Ned said, and, like men who had saved each other's lives twice and hurt each other once and forgave the hurt differently, they did not say those things aloud again. "Will you help me choke the South's throat with our narrow land?" Howland's smile was a thing with more in it than humor. "The neck has been choking armies since men put iron on their feet," he said. "We will not let an army past us that has not paid in a way it does not wish to pay. We will make the frogs sing at night so loudly that men forget their orders. We will make a wrong turn look like a good idea. We will make a good idea sink. How many men can you spare?" Wyman asked, practical, respectful. "Not many," Howland said, "nor is many my way. I will give you slower things. I will give you bogs where there were none last year, reeds that move because a hand tells them to, water that looks shallow and is not. I will give you time." "Time," Wyman said, "is the flour of any bread." He looked at Ned. "We will need to build ovens." They did. In the lanes of White Harbor, a blacksmith who had once thought himself too old to take on apprentices took 3 in a week. A woman who had been a scullion became supervisor of grain storage because she was the only one who could shame men and numbers into behaving. A bookkeeper redrew the city's ledgers in a hand so clear even the great John could admire the loops. A herd of cows that had been meant for market were redirected to men who dug earth around the city and piled it where earth was needed for a wall that was not merely brick but habit. The mountain man Wyman had sent returned with a bone whistle around his neck and the name of a clan head spoken low in his mouth. He went out again thinner and with better shoes. Word from the south came like smoke. One rumor was that the boy had grown bored and fed knives. Another was that the queen's hand could do what she wanted with what was left of the king's. There was talk of another claimant across the water with a mind like an abacus. There was talk of wolves in the riverlands who did not wear banners. There was a whisper that Robb Stark had called men to him and made of their footsteps something like thunder along the Green Fork. At that Ned slowed, not outwardly, but inside. He was both more and less than a father in those days. He was a function. He was meant to act as man and symbol both. He had to speak to his necessary grief in little pieces. Wyman, who valued what could be counted and what could not, put a hand on his shoulder and left it there for a measured breath. "You cannot be in 2 places that far apart," he said, and it was a mercy to hear it told plain. "You must make this one stand for you." "Send my word to him," Ned said. "Tell him I would give my hand to be at his and the other to keep him from doing anything foolish." Tell him that the North will not be a single thing standing alone. It will be a braid. Teach him that. The boy is quick, Wyman said. He will catch the end of your meaning and hold it. The Umbers sent back men who had been made into messengers. The Glovers sent more bolts and a plan for bracing that was so simple no man who had not thought for a month would have conceived it. Mormont women wrote, and their letters were full of inventory and the kind of pride that forbids boasting because boasting is redundant when one can list accomplishments. The Boltons sent an answer that was cool and full of the kind of courtesy that leaves little room for warmth, and that too was an answer. A letter in an unknown hand came from the Rills, and it asked questions so practical that Wyman, who loved practicality, laughed aloud in delight and wrote in the margin yes, yes, yes to 3 of them and a careful no to 2. At night, when the wind had come down from the hills with teeth in it, Ned walked the smallest roads of White Harbor with a cloak that made him an ordinary man and listened to what men said when they did not think a lord was listening. He learned which dockworkers were most likely to drink too much and, more dangerously, to talk too much. He learned which boys dreamed of war, and which men already knew better and dreamed of boots that didn't leak. He learned which corners the town omens favored. He learned that a certain dog refused to go down one alley because a floor there had given way once, and the animal did not forget. He took that as instruction. He went to the temple and stood at the back and heard a prayer to a god he did not own and let it wash over him like the sound of a river that was not his to ford. He went to the god's wood, too, and sat with a tree that remembered the cold the way a man remembers the name of a lover he never spoke. He told it nothing that he would have been ashamed to tell a man. He listened. The tree's replies were only the small noises of living in winter, and those were enough. In those weeks, a plan turned from concept to weight. It was not yet an alliance, not in that name. It was a habit of looking north first. It was letters that did not flatter. It was men traveling in pairs when alone would have been quicker. It was a taste for making small things strong, and not pouring all the iron into a single sword. It was the decision to prefer the way of men who had learned to carry buckets before they learned to carry banners. A month after Ned had come in under fog, a party of mountain men came down to the harbor with the wariness of cats. They were lean, and their faces were the faces of rock. They did not like crowds. They did not like the way the sea took the horizon away and replaced it with movement. But they stood, 7 of them, in Wyman's yard, with their heads like felled trees, irreverent and evaluating. Their headman wore no crown. He looked at Ned with a frankness that was not a challenge but not surrender either. "You are the man we were told about," the headman said. "You are gray the way weather is gray before snow. I prefer that kind of gray to the shine of men who have never slept wet." "I am that man," Ned said. "I will ask you to be patient, and then I will ask you to be stubborn. I will not ask you to be fools." "Good," said the headman. "We can be fools by ourselves without help in that regard." He glanced at Wyman, then back. "You plan to make of this place something that can stand. Do so. When the time comes to hit something, send us word of where to stand so that your hitting is heard more loudly. Do not send us orders written as if they were the tide." "I would not," Ned said. The headman nodded. He looked at the harbor, the ships rocking, the gulls making law above them. "I do not like the smell of fish that is not my fish," he said, "but I can grow used to anything if the thing to be endured is honest." From the marsh, Howland sent men with bundles of reeds that concealed spears and men who returned with the kind of quiet that says a job needed doing and had been. From inland, there were reports of a man in the east who had taken too much and thought to take more. Wyman sent him a letter that said words that made him decide to take less and live to enjoy it. Ned's hair grew, his face leaned. He laughed rarely, but when he did, it pulsed through the room like warm air. He taught a handful of boys to ride in tight formations and made them pass under branches with their backs bent low. He corrected the way a tax had been calculated so that it did not break a small farmer on the wheel of a number that looked fair and was not. He approved the hiring of a midwife from a village upriver because Wyman trusted her hands. Ned told Wyman that these appointments were as martial as iron, and Wyman said, "Better," and sent for 2 more. On a morning that had frost carefully laid across every surface like a blessing withdrawn slowly, a raven arrived. Its feathers were ungentled by wind. It looked at Ned with the particular intelligence of birds who are paid in bread and allowed to think their own thoughts. The message it carried was short. It spoke of Robb moving as if he had been born to do it. It spoke of the Riverlords answering. It spoke of Tywin Lannister sending a gloved hand where he wished to send a fist and getting instead a sleeve torn. It said that the boy at the Twins had become less of a boy. Ned put his hand on the bird's breast before they took it away. It felt like engine and stubbornness. "He will need us," he said, and those around him understood that the sentence was not the same as saying he would go. It was a sentence about a sum. He would give his son his strength without putting his body between the boy and the world. It is harder to do that. It is also, sometimes, the only way to make of a boy a man who does not break at the first strike. That night, Wyman pulled out a map. It was an old thing, parchment that had been remade too many times, a palimpsest of decisions. He weighed it with stones and held it down with his big hand. Ned stood beside him, and the two of them bent like men peering into a well to see if someone had fallen in. "Here," Wyman said. "Here is the place where we must make ourselves a problem. Not a revolt that the South can stamp on with a heel. A problem it cannot carry as easily as it would like. If we do this foolishly, we will be brave and dead. If we do this well, we will be difficult. Our job is to be difficult until we are necessary." Ned felt a clarity happen in him, like water settling after a thrown stone. "Then we begin with food, with paths, with questions. If the South cannot feed itself without us, or cannot march without us, or cannot know what we are doing without us, then we have already won more than a battle." "You are a boring man," Wyman said, and meant it as the highest praise. "Remain so. When the time for noise comes, we will make the maximum amount of noise for the least cost, which is, I think, the true art of warfare." In the morning, the city woke to an ordinary day. Bread was baked. Nets were mended. Children fought and were scolded. On certain corners, men who carried nothing carried the understanding that they would carry something later if needed. Along the White Knife, boats moved in patterns that looked like daily life and were also practiced for how to move in a hurry when a bell made a different sound. In the counting house, the ledgers learned to carry the possibility of siege and still behave like books. Up in the Godswood, beneath the whispering boughs that had outlived master and servant alike, Ned knelt a final time before work called him down the hill, and he told the old red-face what he had decided. That he would not be a man cut in two by honor and love, but a man who made of those two a single instrument that could be tuned over and over again. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not need it. He asked for luck, and luck came down like the breath of a horse one trusts. A messenger found him as he returned to the world of iron and lists. He was a boy with wet hair and a hat too large for him. He looked as if he had slept under a barrel, and perhaps he had. "A man from the hills," the boy said. "He says he must speak to the man who is gray like weather. He has a token." "What token?" The boy held out a small thing, cupped in both palms. It was a button carved from antler, with a hole off center and a line cut through it that meant nothing to anyone who did not know what it meant. Ned closed his hand over it and felt how light it was, and how heavy. "Bring him," he said. They brought the man in. He did not remove his hat, because his countrymen did not remove their hats indoors. He stood as if the floor might shift. He did not pretend to be at ease, because pretending to be at ease is a different language. He spoke his own and no other. He held himself straight out of a courtesy to those who had not killed him yet. "Lord," he said, and not because he liked saying it, "they are coming by the road through the hills. They come as if they come through their own granary. They have not learned to fear stones. We thought you should know, so that if you are the man you claim you are, the man with the gray in his beard, you can make a lesson for them." Ned nodded once. He did not glorify the moment with words. He sent for Wyman. He sent for Galbart Glover. He sent for the Great John. He sent no one to the Boltons. The Boltons would have sent themselves if it had been their nature to be present in that way. He sent for the woman who counted flour. He sent for the boy who could run without losing his breath. In the room where the map lay, they gathered like a slow storm. "We will not meet them in force," Ned said. And this time there was no argument because even the Great John had learned something about his own weight and where to put it. "We will teach them to go back the way they came. We will make them forget why they set out. We will turn them around in their own minds." "How?" the Great John asked, and there was triumph in his smile because he liked to be told a thing that would let him hit later in a better way. "We will take their food," Wyman said, "and we will send their horses home without riders, and we will give them strange dreams. We will make their fires go out where they think they will not go out. We will move a boundary stone and watch a map become a lie." "Howland," Ned said, and there he was in the doorway, quiet as a reed, with mud on his boots that had never bothered to learn to be ashamed of itself. "It is wet weather," Howland said. "A good season to teach men to swim." "Do what you do," Ned said, "and send me a raven when they begin to learn." "I will send you frogs," Howland said. A whole message compressed under the word, and was gone. The first reports came back in a day. A wagon turned on its side because the driver did not understand the way a path tightened under foliage. The second in 2 days. Men who had waded a stream and found halfway that their boots held water the way a bucket does. The third in 3. A tent line broken in the night by a hand that knew which knot would undo the rest. On the 4th day, a riderless horse came into White Harbor with foam dried on its chest and a saddle that had been made for a man who liked to be above things and had learned that falling makes one equal. The old man with the twisted foot met it as if it were a ship and put his hand on its shoulder. "You did well," he said. On the 5th, a raven, bedraggled, out of patience with everything but its own job, landed at Wyman's window and ate 2 raisins before allowing the message to be taken. It said in 2 lines that the enemy had turned. It said that the marsh had learned a new song and that it was called Retreat. It said, in a sour little flourish at the end that was purely Howland, that men who had not counted frogs among their enemies were poor at counting. Ned went to the godswood again. He thanked the old gods for frogs and for men who were quiet and for women who counted flour. He thanked them for Wyman's laughter and for Galbart's hinge and for the Great John's promise to keep his hands off a wall until it was time to beat a man with it. He thanked them for the torn-eared man with his boat, and for the child with rope burns and the old man who tasted the wind before deciding what to call it. He thanked them for the ordinary, which had become the foundation of the extraordinary they were making. He did not believe as he stood there that the story was done. He did not even believe it had truly begun. He believed only this, that there had been, somewhere under the City of Lies, a small gate where an honest man could make himself smaller still and crawl through, and beyond it, a water that carried him, and beyond that, a shore that was his, and a harbor that was theirs, and a set of lives that knew how to hold together even when the South turned its face into a scowl and demanded the world be as it expected. He believed that men could be taught to turn their faces to the weather and not flinch. He believed, because belief was a kind of labor that could be performed in the dark, that there would be time. The first snow flurries of the season came late that afternoon, a handful of white confetti shaken from an amused sky. They melted when they met the stones. People looked up, sighed, and went back to what they were doing. In a high window, a girl with flour on her cheek drew a circle on the glass and waited for it to disappear. In a low room by the docks, a boy wrapped in a cloak too big for him counted the steps he would take if called upon, and found a number he liked. Out on the road that had remembered it was not a road, men cursed softly and turned their faces toward a south that would not, today, receive them gladly. Ned stood under the last leaves, brown as old bread, and let the cold make him more awake. Behind him, the world of numbers and names moved. Ahead of him, a river lifted its voice and brought news of the sea. He set his shoulders. He went to work.